Hi, so I will be discussing Chapter 1 of Changing English. The chapter title is English Voices. In this chapter, we will look at how the English language varies and changes, the diversity of English speakers, how English is used, and what it means to different speakers in different parts of the world. There are places all over the world that use English as a primary language. For instance, the Scots, the Irish, and the Welsh all use the English language. However, each region of English speakers all have a different dialect of that language. Because of this, and surprisingly enough, English is not exactly the same all over the world, as one may think. There is, in fact, Scottish English, Irish English, and Welsh English, along with varied other dialects across English-speaking countries, which is in accordance with Tom McWhorter. Throughout the world, there is kind of a common core English that is used to create kind of like a basic version of the English language. But due to cultural shifts and the rising of the modern world, so to speak, the basic version of English has become the varied language that many use today. And the Common Core is something that is not really being discussed any longer. Certain labels that are given to the English language that they only come into effect when part of the language is specifically part of the British usage or American usage, and especially in informal conversation versus the dignity of formal writing. But just as the different Englishes described in this chapter are characterized by their linguistic traits and socio-political context, the grammar that is discussed in this chapter promotes the idea that English language is somehow fixed and unchanging, essentially. Randolph Quirk promotes this idea along with his colleagues, and they were kind of the ones that developed that idea of a common core English. Quirk and his colleagues used their grammar and its rules to primarily emphasize the more, educated versions of the English language, like the British and American usages of it. And they kind of wanted to play down or kind of mute the diversity that was highlighted by McWhorter's ideas, which of course McWhorter, his ideas came out about 30 years later or so from Quirk's. This chapter goes on to look at the different varieties and regional dialects of English language. The poems that are used and the activities within the chapter, they're used to kind of exemplify accents or the varieties that differ only in terms of pronunciation, and dialects or varieties that differ only in terms of grammar or vocabulary. Accents and dialects are used in order to distinguish between the different regional and social varieties of English. However, even though we can often use these different distinctions to identify types of English, one could not, simply draw a line around each type of usage of the language to define change or a new language. This is more often given over to social or political grounds rather than linguistic criteria. It's estimated that English is used by at least 750 million people worldwide, and it's now essentially considered the first truly global language. However, there is considerable uncertainty that surrounds this estimation about the number of English speakers across the world. The British linguist David Crystal He describes the common distinctions between three different types of speakers. There are speakers for whom English is their mother tongue or original language, kind of what they grew up speaking. Those who use English as a second language, so they have their own mother tongue and then they learn English. And then those who consider English as a foreign language. And this can also kind of be simplified as, native or non-native speakers of the English language. The differentiation is generally made by those who actually teach the English language. For many scholars, that this distinction leads to questions about how English is actually used by its speakers in forms of context and what social and cultural meanings are attributed to it. Which admittedly, the reasons behind what English uses to, or what English means to its users will vary depending on this context. In many countries, the use of English is regulated, like the rules and regulations set in place to protect certain endangered species. English is also regulated in order to protect endangered cultures or languages and those speakers that are seen as being under threat. In the chapter speaks about Kenya, and in Kenya the two official languages are Kiswahili, which is Swahili, and English. And even though English is viewed as a symbol of status, it also remains this kind of reminder of the colonial legacy. Within Kenya's capitalistic system, there is a climate that has been created for a dependence on the English language. However, there is an argument in most parts of the country that English should not be popularized over the indigenous languages. And because if English is more accepted, then people will not bother with learning any of the other languages that are native to that area, and cultural significance could essentially be lost. Now, across the continent, English is becoming kind of an educational requirement for many children, forcing them to become bilingual. The process of code switching, or the alternating between one language, which would be English, or and another language, which would be Kiswahili, is used within the classroom in order to promote the learning of English. Because of the integration of the English language, many of the new generations have learned to combine English and Kiswahili, which this is a process that is known as morphological hybridization. Now, in Canada, English and French are the official languages. Canada is a predominantly English-speaking country, with French only being the primary language in the province of Quebec and along the border in New Brunswick and Ontario. The English and French both competed in the colonization of the northern parts of North America, with English eventually winning this battle. The colonies that were south of Canada, they eventually broke away from the crown and became the United States of America. And of course, Canada stayed loyal to the crown, which, because of political mobilization, French-speaking parts of Canada are now kind of constantly on guard in order to maintain their language and not lose people to the English language. In contrast to Kenya and Canada, English does not maintain an official status. In France, English taught as a foreign language, is taught as a foreign language, but is generally intended for international use. The French language is much like the English language in that it is or has spread throughout the world to various locations, though the use of French in some parts is in a state of decline. This decline is due to the pressures of other local languages and also English as well. Now, internationally, English is used in a variety of different contexts. The English language takes on social meanings related to the speaker in places such as Kenya and France. There's actually this fear of Anglo-American culture or cultural domination, but it is not always associated, or it doesn't always have those Western connotations. In many respects, English is viewed as a language of opportunity. There is, however, the idea that many different variations of the English language will lead to the fragmentation of English, leading to new languages, essentially. This is the fear that kind of lies behind the desire for a single international standardized English, which these fears, some scholars have invalidated them, such as David Crystal. He speaks about this, and many argue that the communities of speakers do not have the kind of strong common social and political motivations, or the social and economic power, which would be needed needed in order to actually have their dialects or accents, however you want to say it, recognized as a distinct English language. Overall, this chapter, it highlighted the diversity that is present within the usage of the English language, the differences among the speakers, the various patterns, and the different contexts of which English is associated with. Though linguists often rely on varying categories for discussing the diversity of English, these are merely idealizations and prove that it is actually quite difficult to try and draw those definitive boundaries according to linguistic category. In general, this chapter has taught us that English may be viewed as beneficial, purely instrumental, or even as a threat.
Hello, I'm Maury Savage. I will be covering John McWhorter's Our Magnificent Bastard Tongue, The Untold History of English. Mostly I'm focusing on the Celtic impact here. I will also be referencing in one or two places the Anglo-Saxon invasion video, which we covered in this unit, but which is not part of the overall assignment, so I'm not going to be focusing on it. Throughout the study of English for quite a while, there was a very strong push against the idea that Celtic languages such as Welsh and Cornish, and whatever extinct Celtic language, most likely extinct anyway, could have just been Welsh in an earlier form, the Celts spoke before the Anglo-Saxons came and subjugated them, not wiped them out. Page 11 to 12 of McWhorter covers in a pretty detailed way that it's highly unlikely, to the point of being impossible, that the Celts were wiped out entirely by the Anglo-Saxons. That assumption's false. Anyway, we're dealing with the idea that Celtic had no impact on the formation of modern English, when it pretty clearly did. Celtic languages are the only ones that sprinkle do throughout their sentences for no discernible reason, and use what could form gerunds or participles to form their standard present tense. Other languages do one of these things sometimes, but English and the Celtic languages are the only languages that really do both, and English is unique in how it does both. We don't use quite as much meaningless do as, say, Welsh does. And our verb-noun structure, I don't think it's exactly the same, but it's very close. McWhorter also makes it clear that, or it starts on 31, that one of the reasons that people pushed against the idea that Celtic languages had an impact on English was that people were basing most of their assumptions on documentary evidence. Writing. The assumption that people communicated by writing in that particular period of history on that particular island, very, very, very unlikely. Pretty much unlikely anywhere before the advent of the printing press, or before the advent of most forms of modern technology, really. I'm sure letters existed. People wrote them, I'm certain. However, only the elite, whether nobility, which is a French word that made it into the language later, but I'm not the one covering that, or priests or scribes, really knew how to read and write, just in general. I'm sure other people did, but it was uncommon. It was an uncommon skill to possess at any real level of felicity or facility. One of those words that begins with F. Anyway, McWhorter makes it very clear that the assumption that writing was the method of communication is not a good one, and so we can't use that for evidence. We have to look more sort of like a paleontologist. We have to unearth evidence based on context. And the context seems to bear McWhorter out. Celtic has elements in it. The Celtic language branch has elements in it that the Germanic branch does not. English is the only Germanic offshoot that has that particular set of traits. Makes sense to me, and McWhorter provides the evidence to back it up. But there still seems to be a pushback against accepting that Celtic had an impact on English, which is very strange to me. What do all of you think? Is there a greater likelihood that Celtic had no impact, despite what we know about the similarities of Welsh and English? Is there perhaps validity to the traditional approach? I look forward to reading what you think on the subject. I'm hoping you'll agree with me because I like feeling like I'm right. McWhorter goes through a great deal of this material. McWhorter also talks about a great deal of frustration with how people classify proof. As I mentioned, the impact of written evidence on the record, as people perceive it, of the development of English, frustrates him to a great deal, to a great extent. He said, Celtic grammar is underneath all of those utterly ordinary utterances in modern English. Our language is a magnificent bastard. Celtic is a hybrid of... I said Celtic is a hybrid. Well, too bad I suck at editing and can't fix that. Anyway, English is a hybrid of Celtic grammar, Norman French words, some Danish words, and a Proto-Germanic offshoot. English is a very strange language that I think does show very strong marks of being influenced by Celtic grammar. I buy that approach. I think McWhorter makes a very good argument. I look forward to hearing what the rest of you think.
Hello guys, my name is Brittany Cooper and I am here focusing on the BBC documentary The Adventures of English, Episode 1, Birth of a Language. Now we all know that new dialects in English are evolving all the time, every decade, every time period of this world. But with the success of many invasions happening throughout those years, this threatened to destroy our language. But aside from all that, I'm here to focus on the BBC documentary, Episode 1. So the episode talks about the modern-day Frisian language and how it is the closest comparison of the sounding language to English and its origin story from over 2,000 years ago. So I'm going to break down like this Frisian compact for you guys. So this is how it begins. In the Netherlands, northern of the sea, is where the province of Friesland, not Friesland, Friesland, which is spells, but it may sound delicious, but it's definitely Friesland, where it's located. Friesland is believed that there are many language sounding is closer to what an English ancestor may sound. Now, the reason for that is that both modern English and modern Frisian is traced all the way back to the family of Germanic languages, and for the most part, the words stay the same. So, for example, butter may sound the same, but it's spelled different. So, in the Frisian language, it's going to be spelled B-U-T-E-R with the accent over the U, while English is spelled Butter, or cheese. Sounds similar. Okay, you spell cheese Cheese in English. Well, actually, in Frisian, it begins with a T followed by the SIIS. So it's saying like tease. You can kind of hear it. So a theory I kind of came up with that one is like with the Frisian language is kind of compared to sounding out the whole world structure. So like if you say the word cat, you kind of saying all three letters like at. So anyway, those words, along with others, were invented by West German tribes who were deemed as warlike, adventurous people. So those tribes been on the move throughout Europe, and they created settlements that are now called the lowlands of Northern Europe. So in the lowlands of Northern Europe, this includes countries of Holland, Germany, and Denmark. So as the tribes got more greedy for land, they moved on to another island, which is called the island of Terschelling, which now includes Jutes, Angles, and Saxons in order to sail out for a better life. And as they sail out, the Germanic tribe, which includes those guys, they took the English language with them, which kind of sounds selfish, but it's probably not. So another main idea I kind of found out that's connected to the Frisian language is like Christianity. So it's like English was trying to stray away from its tribal roots, but by doing so, it revived the religion of Christianity. So missionaries of Christianity did not only bring faith in stone, however, they brought the international language of Christian religion, which is now they deem Latin. So now we're into Latin territory. So Latin terms become part of our English world vocabulary, or as you could say, maybe like our list or whatever. So words like our author was there a terror, or like apostolus became apostle, many other words, verse, monk, priest, mass, any other words that involves Christianity all come from Latin. So Latin would become a pattern of English, as well as they layer words taken from different sources of language. So, and then the opposite of that, the English took the script of Latin. Since the Latin took the pattern of English, we took the English, we took the script. So the Anglo-Saxon, Frisians, and Jutes, who become the English, hadn't bought script as we know it from them, but they created something else, runes. From those runes, we got the runic alphabet. So the runic alphabet was made of symbols formed mainly of straight lines, so the letters could be carved into wood, stone. So instead of using parchment or paper, the runic became the form of communication. So with the runes, or runic alphabet, this was compared, well, I think it's compared, or comparison to the Latin alphabet. But the Latin alphabet was written different. The Latin alphabet had curves and bows, so it allowed words to be easily written using a pen and ink onto parchment or vellum, which gathered together in a book. Sorry. That book became, as people know today, though, English. Mostly during that time period, rune writing that was recovered suggests that runes were mainly used for short, practical messages. With these creations, a native cultural scholarship began to bloom that to where the culture would focus on Latin and on its writing. So, an English monk and scholar Bede, who was located in his foreign Gospels, which was at St. Paul and Jarrah, he began writing the first ever history of the English-speaking people, and he also wrote the language of scholarship, but that part was in Latin. So he did the English-speaking people, which he began writing, and then when he started writing the language of scholarship, he wrote that in Latin, which kind of seems confusing, but it's not. First thing he wrote was English, second thing he wrote was Latin. So, So that's kind of like the two first main points I want to address, like how Christianity was involved into Friskin, I think, and also how they used almost the same Germanic traces as English from way back then. But also, our little host Melvin Bragg also said something about the poem Beowulf, which I know probably half of us read like in high school or middle school, but Beowulf, he was talking about the poem Beowulf to this interview, Seamus, and then he described it as it uses English, like old English language. So, and then with that old English language, it begins the story with the glorious tradition that would lead to Chaucer, Shakespeare, and beyond. Like that, I mean, let me rephrase that. Like, its use of English language and how it was written down, it begun like other authors and stuff and using Old English in their works. Should have said it like that. But the poem itself celebrates the glorious life of Germanic tribes that incorporates the warriors who gives the poem its name. Now, Beowulf is not the only poem that uses Germanic tribes, which I kind of researched, but that's not the only poem, but this was like the main poem he talked about in the documentary. He also set out some little notes in Beowulf, like how he felt about the poem itself and what he felt, what it gave, what it had, how the power of language can be heard, like when Beowulf is fighting his arch enemy, Grendel the monster. So like in that little fight scene, how he was like, he grabbed them all on a man in his binge, bit into his bone lappings, bolted down his blood, and gorged him on his lumps, leaving the body utterly lifeless, eating up, hand and foot. So, by saying that passage, he turns to the interviewee Seamus and saying, do you think this is developed as a poetic language? Bradley said it is certainly a fully developed poetic language. And I can agree, you can kind of hear how, every time you read a passage, you can kind of hear like a little story, like a little poem story. Like, you know, when you read poems, it kind of tells a story about somebody. That's what I kind of felt like it did, and that's what kind of felt like Bragg felt too. So, Bragg also said that it certainly fully developed the poetic language with great elaboration, but its main focus uses Old English. So, like, these last time periods kind of use Old English as a guide. So, and Bragg also said that he had a sense of an indicative mood throughout reading it. He also said it's terrific for like description and action, how it describes all the action scenes, and all the action scenes are described. And he also says it made up an extra language in Anglo-Saxon, where you can see the words are clear and direct. Like you see bone lappings, and you break it down from bone lappings, break it apart. You get every bone that's connected from word to word. Like you can see like what part, you can kind of feel what kind of bones he's talking about. Like, you know what he's talking about. And I know there's a terrible example, but you know what he's talking about. Like bone lappings and bone house and bolted down and maul and all that. And then you have like beautiful words for like instruments. Like the harp is called gliobeam, which is happy wood, or joy wood, or excited wood. And then you got like shields, shorts and shields, which is warbound, or in this sense, wigboard, WIGBORD, or another word he used was Gomen Wudu, GOMEN WDU. So all this, he said, combined into a specific poetic energy. With that energy, it is in the language itself, and it is given ability to make compounds, which is still in German, which gives it its great beauty, which is why Beowulf is a classic to this day in history and in English. So, that is the end of my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed all our presentations, and y'all have a good day.